I want it destroyed. It doesn't deserve a second chance. My husband didn't get a second chance. Why would this weapon get a second chance?
And welcome back to Square Off. That was Julie Erfle, the widow of a Phoenix police officer who was killed in the line of duty back in 2007. We reported on the lawsuit Erfle filed last month to block the city of Phoenix from selling the gun that was used to kill her husband. Now, under a 2013 state law, cities must sell weapons confiscated by law enforcement. Despite the Arizona Constitution's protections for victims' rights, the 2013 law does not give victims a say in how a gun used to harm a loved one is disposed of. Many of those weapons, according to a nationwide review, end up back in the hands of bad guys after they're sold. Now, after hearing Erfle's story, Republican Maricopa County Attorney Rachel Mitchell said she wanted to change the law. Here's an edited version of our conversation. How did you find out about this, let's call it a loophole in this law?
Well, I became aware of it because I became aware of what Julie Erfle was doing in terms of asking that the gun that killed her husband not be sold under this statute. And I mean, obviously my heart went out to her. And so when all this happened in 2013, when the legislature passed this law, you were in the county attorney's office then. Were you even aware this was going on? You know, in 2013, I was a sex crimes prosecutor, as I was for most of my career, and so that wasn't something that I was particularly involved in, you know, lobbying for this office. And you had a gut reaction to Julie's story when you heard about it. What was that? Sure. That it's wrong. I mean, you know, usually as a prosecutor, I try to come at things a little bit more, you know, from a legal perspective. But, I mean, the thought of the gun that killed somebody I loved being just sold, it's just wrong. Victims' rights are important to you. There is, they're constitutionally protected here in Arizona. How does this fit into victims' rights in a court case? Well, in that case, in Julie's case, there was actually no prosecution. So, but in a normal situation where there would be a prosecution of somebody for homicide, for example, I think it does fit in terms of the, you know, treating the victim, and the next of kin is the victim, with fairness, respect, and dignity. And I mean, how unfair to have the weapon that killed your loved one just resold. That just is wrong. And so you've kind of taken this and run with it. And you've talked to members of the legislature. Tell us what you're doing, what you want to see happen, and who can make it happen. Well, you know, I have routine meetings with legislators to talk about our legislative agenda. And when I heard about, you know, Julie's efforts, I thought that we need to make that part of our agenda. That's just the right thing to do. I've talked to Julie about it, as well as other victim advocates, community advocates, and we're, you know, talking about how it's going to be drafted, how broadly, but yeah, I think that's something that needs to happen. So you're talking about amending the 2013 law? I think that would be the best way to go about it, is to focus on that statute and just put in an exception for example, her situation where the gun was used to murder somebody. Well, talk about how broadly that could be, because tragically, she's not the only person who's been, you know, tragically who's a victim. There are many, many others, and many others who the weapon that was used to kill their loved one might be sold off already. That could have happened. I don't know. I mean, obviously, we'll have to look at whether we write it as an opt-in or an opt-out type of situation. What does that mean, opt-in or opt-out? Whether the victim has to affirmatively request that it not be sold, or whether it just is not sold because of its involvement in a particular type of crime. What types of crime we extend that to, whether we extend it to other violent crimes such as shooting somebody, but the person does not die from that, but perhaps they could be seriously injured. We're working with the legislature and with Julie on how broadly that's going to be written. The origins of this law were to prevent guns from being destroyed. Cities were holding gun buybacks and were planning to destroy weapons. Do you feel that way, that guns should not be destroyed if they're confiscated by cities or You know, Bram, I've always been very pro-Second Amendment, but there are certain situations, and this is one of those situations where a gun is used to murder a loved one, and if the victim, the next of kin, wants that destroyed, I think it should be destroyed. And so that collides with the strong Second Amendment advocates
at the Capitol. And there's kind of a paradox here in that the guns can't be destroyed, but investigative reports have shown these guns quite often are used in the commission of another crime once they're auctioned off.
Well, and I'm not extending this to that greater debate. I'm extending this to a situation where a victim of crime is specifically asking, or a crime has happened where somebody is murdered, that gun not go back out. This is not the greater debate about whether guns in general should be destroyed. This is about those types of guns.
I brought up the Victims' Bill of Rights. That would have to be amended by the people if we're to be inserted in there. That was a constitutional amendment, Prop 104, I think, back in the day.
Well, it is a constitutional amendment, but it's also enacted through statute as well as rule. And so we probably could have a statutory change that would put that under victims' rights, or at least as a recognition that this is something that would be contemplated by victims' rights.
So best case scenario, what would you like to see by the end of next year's session?
I would certainly like to see that guns used at a minimum in homicides, that if the victims or next of kin wish that gun to not be resold, that be permissible under the law.
What do you remember from that story that really spoke to you? Because
my whole career I've worked with victims of violent crimes, and what they have been through, I think, is something that society needs to recognize. This, like I said, this is not a comment on the greater issue about whether guns should be sold or destroyed. This is a comment about whether that gun should be resold, and whether she should have some say in that.
Something to watch for in January at the legislature. And that's our show for this week. Thanks very much to all of our guests. Thank you so much for joining us. See you back here next weekend for another round of Sunday Square Off.